Happy to see that you are still here. I hope it's the same behind the screen on Zoom. So we will begin the roundtable with the Slido, a question, and then it will enable us to launch the discussion. So you have the QR code here, and the question is, which of the following items need to be prioritized to tackle the influence of the alcohol industry representatives? You can vote for 3 items maximum. Oh, yes. Engine? Still working. I guess when the music stops at the end, or okay, so the winner is greater transparency of the links between the alcohol industry and health policy decisions. I think it was the conclusion of some of your presentations, so maybe you want to react to this result? Yes, Florence?
I personally would not have picked up that one, and it's very simple. Of course, transparency is important, but you know, if I kill your sister and I'm transparent about it, it doesn't mean to say that I'm not guilty. And so what I'm saying by this, it's for the industry, to know the industry engagement with the policymaker is extremely important, so we can monitor it. But we need to have some sanctions, or what do we do with this information? And what we have with increased transparency, like we have the registry in Ireland, which is quite unique, is brilliant, because we can expose, but we also need the people to expose it. And having this information on its own is not enough, and transparency in itself is not an end point, it's just a tool.
So I guess your choice would be a ban of alcohol industry representatives from engaging into health policy decisions, or what would be your choice?
A ban, definitely not, because if I'm a policymaker, I have to engage with all stakeholders by law. I think there's a misunderstanding of the public health community, particularly in alcohol, to believe that basically Article 5.3 of the FCTC is saying anywhere that public health, that policymakers should not meet with the industry. They have to, but when they do, then they need to make these interactions transparent and public, and they should not involve the tobacco industry, and policymakers therefore should not involve any of the health farming industries, including the alcohol industry, when developing and implementing public health policies. But if they're regulating their product, then they have to. They have to look at them and say, well, what is going to be the impact on your sector? And then analyze whether what they are saying is true or not. And then talk to public health experts and professionals to look at the impact of the public health policy. So they should interact, but they should not mix the two, because we are not the same, we are very different.
Could we scroll down a little bit on the slide to see which is the least, the measure that you think is the least effective? Is it possible to scroll down or to see all the responses? Or not?
More involvement of health professions, 14%.
Okay, that's an interesting one. So the involvement of health professionals, it was actually a comment made this morning. Is it helpful to have GPs, health professionals, the healthcare system more on board, because they are trusted actors for the public? And to bring them in the political debate. What is your view? And I think we also had a representative of the Standing Committee for Doctors here. So what is your view on that? Or from...
I have another very strong view about this, in a sense that it's extremely important to for those who understand the policy process and understand policymakers to bring with them public health professionals. But I'm a professional lobbyist, and my job is to engage with policymakers. The job of health professionals is quite different, and their education is actually to fix a problem. And the world of politics is, as was explained, extremely long, and it takes a long, long time. And what I found working very closely with a lot of admiration and a lot of trust with doctors or with health professionals is that they don't understand and they feel frustrated when policymakers don't listen to them, like the policymakers should be their patients. The thing is that the world of politics is quite complex, has its own rules, and the world of health professionals and doctors is also embedded with its own rules, and the two are very different. And the world of politics and politicians and policies is very slow, as was explained by Ewan, and it takes a long, long time. So I think public health lobbyists need to bring with them doctors and nurses and patients and health professionals. But I think the job of a health lobbyist is to lobby in the same way as the industry is investing in lobbyists. And I think I'm quite sad, actually, disappointed that so few of you have said that we need more funding for NGOs, because the industry knows that they need lobbyists. And you guys, you think that you can do it without us, then you're mistaken. I'm sure about this.
Yes.
I was just going to pick up on the second last one, more involvement of the citizens, because I was quite disappointed that that's not right near the top, because the influence on policymakers to change policymakers' minds actually will come from citizens as well. The bit about increasing public and policy awareness of the strategies of the industry will involve or will require more involvement of citizens. So for me, I would have put that, I feel that should be much higher. And actually, I think, you maybe can comment, but from my sort of understanding of the context in Ireland, the involvement of sort of citizens groups and alcohol advocacy groups has been hugely important, not least in ensuring that the alcohol industry, I think it was last year or the year before, got kicked out of schools in Ireland. So I suppose there's another argument, which is that a lot of our discussions about addressing alcohol harms do often focus on academics and science and policymakers, and the citizens quite often don't get brought into the discussion at all. But they're a really important supporter of policy and of the science, and an important lever in themselves. So I think that should be much higher than second from the bottom, actually.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with Mark. I think that the role of the community voice certainly has a place. I think in the instance of the schools issue, which to my reading was the removal of Drink Aware from the education program. I mean, essentially, it was driven by two NGOs that really began that process, and obviously, you know, that's great work. No question about that. The thing that I wanted to comment on was the improving of the scientists' advocacy skills, just a little if I can. I would slightly change that. I think there is definitely a gap within public health profession for greater advocacy skills. And to Florent's point, that has to embrace a deeper understanding of the political system. Now, I obviously come from a political background. That's what I am. I'm not an alcohol scientist. I'm not an alcohol policymaker necessarily. But I think there is a need to, and I have this experience in Ireland where a lot of the public health academics institutions that are producing public health professionals, you know, have a very limited exposure to what is public health advocacy and communications, and so I think that is quite important as a gap that's here. So,
yeah, Florence.
I would fully agree that we need more training and advocacy to train young people and not so young people who believe in their heart that they want to make a change and have a moral ambition to be adequately trained to engage with the policy process on the long-term basis. That's one thing I agree with. But the other thing is, I think the support of the public, in my view, is completely overrated. And I would like to tell the story of tobacco control. When we started, for instance, introducing smoke-free, which were some of the first measures in tobacco, in many countries, and I'm not quite sure about Ireland, which was the first in the world to introduce a smoke-free ban, there was a kind of debate within the public on the benefits of smoke-free. But the public was divided. And when I look at my country, France, the public was against it. But then the measure was introduced and everyone was for it. So this absolute belief, again, that we have in alcohol policy, that we absolutely must have the support of the public in order to make progress, is actually not based on evidence. Because if we look at the history of tobacco control, the public most of the time was not actually in our favor, but was quite against. And then they became the most supported evidence. So we need to be convinced, and when we go to policymakers, we need to say, do the right thing, because we know it will work. And if you change the environment, it will work. Now, having said all this, of course, community support is important. Of course, one doesn't exclude the other, but we should not wait for the public to call on something in order to push for a policy to work, if we know that it is going to work.
Are there any questions from the audience? Let's take a couple of them. Yes, we have 3 ready. So, John, if you want to start.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me, particularly listening to Ewan, was in the countries where we've seen major policy changes, so Scotland, Ireland, we could have had someone from Lithuania here talking about them as well. these tend to be quite smaller countries where politics is perhaps done on a different scale. And I just wondered whether there's something in that that helps us to understand why change happened in those countries and it hasn't happened in some of the larger countries within Europe. And then perhaps also whether that has any implications for how commercial determinants of health operate at the EU level as well, which is obviously quite distant from national populations.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then for Suzanne.
Thank you. It was really just in support of Florence's point. I think in the whole lengthy campaign like there was in Ireland, you often forget in the success that a lot of people come on board at the very end. In the very early stages, it can be a very lonely place, and it tends to be one or two NGOs that move the whole debate from being an outlier to engaging with the political actors who will make it happen and presenting the evidence in a way that's compelling. And I think that's often forgotten when you have a success, because about 10 minutes to midnight before the success, everyone joins. And I know Eunan will remember that there were some days when we were working that there was nobody supporting. And I'm sure Florence has had that experience. So I think it's very important to fund NGOs who are prepared to do hard work well from the beginning, because otherwise it won't happen, because they are the key actors, really. I mean, they're the ones that actually activate the entire sector. So just an observation in support of what Florence was saying.
Thanks. That was Suzanne Costello, actually CEO of the Institute of Public Health in Ireland and president of EuroHealthNet. Yes, Catherine. Oh yeah, I think first was Catherine behind you. She was first, yes, and then you, and then we go to the.
Yes, hello, Catherine Paradis, WHO Europe. You partly answered the question I wanted to ask you, Eunan, because our job at WHO is to nurture and support a network of member state focal point whose ambition is to transform all this evidence we have into policies. And what they keep telling us is, don't tell us what, we know what to do, but tell us how to do it, and then they come back to, of course, Ireland and Lithuania and Scotland, and how do we do it? And I was a bit taken aback by your conclusion where you said, there were two key ingredients, one of them being having a champion politician, minister in place. And then I'm left, what do I tell our member states' focal points that don't have that champion at the moment? Like, what can we do in the meantime? We cannot just tell them to wait for this champion to come. So any tips or advice that I could pass on our focal points in that regard would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Can you handle one more? Yeah, I will summarize quickly. Yeah, okay. Okay, one more. And
so
then
I was just going to
you...
pick up on the debate between Florence and Mark about the involvement of the public. And I think actually you're both right. The public needs to be involved. But that doesn't happen by accident. It needs to be orchestrated, and that can be challenging to do. And the specific case of smoke-free in Scotland, I know in the lead-up to that legislation, we were very, very anxious that the public was turning against it, that there was literally going to be rebellion in the streets when this came in. And the industry had been very active in encouraging that sort of this concern. And at that point, I think this at the time was confidential, but I don't think it is now. Cancer Research UK came in and gave us a load of money to run an advertising campaign about the problems of secondhand smoke. And really, very hard-hitting campaign, just really. And when it actually passed in the end, it was, I think people would say it was the most successful piece of legislation that McConnell introduced, the First Minister introduced. So, so the public are important, but you can't take it for granted. And maybe that is the key role of NGOs to try and orchestrate that, but it's really, really important.
That's right, just to come in there. The other thing that Florence reminded me is that when we were talking about norms earlier, actually policy shapes and leads norms, doesn't it? Which is what you're, that's a really important perspective.
So there were questions about smaller countries. Is it easier? And if it is possible to also be successful without a supportive health minister in place.
To John's question, I suppose everybody will say this, but I think Ireland is a little bit unique. I'm not familiar with the political system in Lithuania, and obviously it has its history, so I don't, but Ireland is a very open democracy. remarkably open and accessible democracy. And so that's one factor. And then on top of that factor, the state, it is a young state, it's only 100 years old, but that state has traditionally stayed out of public health, you know, for a variety of reasons, which we won't go into now. So that has allowed a hugely strongly influential NGO community to build in Ireland. So the combination of that strength in the community and in NGOs, coupled with a really accessible political system, I think is what makes Ireland, and that kind of small country, because everybody knows everybody, generally speaking. We're a bit obsessed about that in Ireland. So it makes things happen reasonably quickly, or can happen. Things can happen pretty quickly. So I don't know that, you know, but there are a couple of factors I think that are unique to Ireland. To Catherine's point about the advice without a political champion, I can't imagine any situation where significant, and we're talking about significant alcohol controls, statutory controls, been established on restricting marketing, influencing price, you know, restricting availability, etc. They're all largely going to be statutory controls. That has to have a political master. It has to have a political architect. And my sense of it is that none of this none of it will be achievable or progressible by not having a political champion. I think they're absolutely critical. Yes, you can make progress. Yes, you can make progress in designing policy asks and bringing about evidence and winning over public support and communities, etc. All of those things are possible. But in the end, someone has to actually take the law into a parliament and guide it through it. So, to your point, I accept that that's not particularly helpful, but you absolutely have to have a political champion in some shape or form. Someone who's prepared to spend political capital, because remember, none of this is popular with the public, to Florent's point.
So if we don't have a political champion, so I want to talk about France. We saw President Macron with a glass of wine. We know his support to the alcohol industry. So Daniel, maybe you can tell us what can be done.
No, I won't say that President Macron is a champion of this kind of legislation for sure. Maybe he's the counter-champion or the champion on the other side. But as a sociologist, I'm not completely convinced about this very individualistic view on the one heroic decision maker. I believe more in a configuration which is already in place at a certain moment and which allows some actors to go on the forefront and to endorse by themselves, namely speaking, because it came to be legitimate, it came to be to have benefits, even political benefits for themselves, to be active on this legislation, and then to have a strong legitimacy and justification which comes afterward. This is usually the kind of process of decision making that is observed, that it becomes much earlier and it continues much after, and the embodiment of the decision is a particular moment, but in a wider, longer, more collective process. So the individualistic aspect is not to be ignored, and if there's a chance to have someone who can endorse it by himself or herself, it's really a chance. But I'm not sure that this is a rule and this is a necessity in any case. Just to come back to the discussion about what is the specific place of the health professionals and even practitioners, and what we did observe, not in the case of alcohol, but we worked more or less the same way on the issue of obesity, with Santé Publique France, by the way. And what we do observe on the long run is that a policy was implemented to a certain degree in France, which is, well, rather good, not that as bad as we could imagine from France. because it was more or less organized by a small group of programmatic, what we call the programmatic elite, which is composed mainly by health professionals. And this is not only by chance, this is because they have an access to top decision maker with a strong level of legitimacy, because they have involved also locally to local politicians with a high degree of legitimacy, because they have also their own resources with their learning societies and so on and so forth. So I don't think that this is to be neglected, because they can be in coalition building strategy a group which can be really key. And we did observe this time in the case of the two different cases we studied for the alcohol debates, that within the parliament, the members of parliament which were more committed to defend the legislation or to protect the legislation on alcohol were mainly physicians. They were elected physicians, they are politicians, they know by heart the rules of the game, but de facto they were coming from the healthcare profession. So I don't think that it is to be neglected. I think that there is a venue to build up coalitions with this player. If I can just add one word about the transparency and about the transparency of the link. I'm not naive enough to believe that it is something which is sufficient by itself. Okay, it's a tool, but there is one key aspect that I would like to explicit. Nowadays, the mindset we have about this transparency of the links is to explicit more or less the conflicts of interest that do exist between decision makers and certain players. But, and this is the reason why we worked on political activities of companies rather than on conflict of interest, for instance, which is more or less an overlapping subject. The conflict of interest issue is an individualistic issue. It's identified as the level of one single person, who is, by chance, only the experts in the room. You never know what are the conflicts of interest of the people working for the industry. Nobody has to declare what is the conflict of interest. The people who are in uncomfortable position at a certain moment are the scientists themselves. And this is a way of weakening the position of science, which is on purpose and which is played at individual level. When I promote transparency, it's the transparency of the corporate activity. It's a collective transparency. It's an organized for long of all the business which is done on purpose. So I think that this transparency is very important and sometimes is hidden by the fact that we just see a little piece of the transparency requirement at the individual level for scientists, and which is a way of, once again, weakening science rather than promoting the issue itself.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. Shall we? Yeah, otherwise we open the debate with the audience. Are there any further questions that you have? And also for our participants online, they can still indeed communicate. Yes.
Peter Rice, President of Eurocare, and I've got a question that might sound a bit odd coming from me, but who is the alcohol industry? So we've heard quite a lot about producers, but Eunan actually mentioned retailers, very important, influential, and also media companies. When we tried to have some action in marketing in Scotland, the editor of our biggest newspaper said this would be really bad news for us. So the producers are kind of clear enough, although some of them will claim to be no and low producers now, so that complicates it. But if we put that to one side, so we have the producers who are very squarely part of the industry, but the retailers, and this is countries that don't have monopolies, and this is supermarkets really, and the media companies. So do we include the supermarkets and media companies in this bubble in any approach that we take on transparency and regulation, or is that just starting fights on a number of different fronts that would just become too problematic? So it's a big question, I think, and one that we need to make some decisions about.
Mm-hmm. Very important. Thank you. Yes.
Yes, hello, Emil from ITNTO. My question is also back to the health champions and similar. But my question is more on how do you keep momentum? I thought about this on Union's presentation. We're talking about how health policy is a marathon in many ways, but many politicians' careers are a sprint in a way. Like politicians are in power for 4 or 5 years maybe, and then are out. How do you keep momentum after you have a health policy champion to actually keep advancing on progress? So it would be interesting to hear Union's experience on that between different governmental shifts as well, and how to keep kind of the topic alive, but also in general, what are your opinions on how to do that? Because I think a lot of us experience a significant progress and then kind of stagnation when you maybe change government or minister. Thank you.
Any further questions? All right, who would like to take? Would you like to start?
We'll just address the question around momentum and maintaining that momentum. It goes back to the observation back to Catherine as well. I mean, and Danielle's point as well. The political champion is important, and you're right, that person can come and go. And in fact, in the 1,000 days of our legislation process, there was 3 ministers for health over that 1,000 days. But I think what keeps the momentum in it is the combination of the policy leadership, the policymaker leadership. So as I kind of hopefully put out at the end of my kind of the ingredients, it wasn't one was more heroic than the other. They were all part of the parcel. So when the political champion moved on, as it were the case, although it may have stayed in the political system as they did in Ireland, it was the policy leadership that maintained the momentum, coupled with a really strong NGO. Going back to John, to the observation I made to John, in Ireland in particular, there's a very strong NGO community. Does a lot of heavy lifting for government, not just in terms of policy, but also in the delivery of services, etc. So in Ireland's case, there was a huge amount of other factors that maintained that momentum. If I can briefly, just to Peter's point, my answer to that, Peter, is the alcohol industry is all of those. And again, in Ireland's case, like we had people, outdoor advertising associations, which fashioned up overnight to become a key voice in this debate. We had petroleum retailers, because in Ireland, believe it or not, we actually allow alcohol to be sold in petrol stations. Go figure. So, like all of those, absolutely, in my mind, as an advocate on that, is they are most certainly part of the problem and will absolutely have to be tackled.
I was just going to come in. I was going to make the same point as you, and I think they are, but it makes me think that they are all part of the alcohol industry, that it would be quite useful to have a sort of explicit discussion about what is the industry and drop some sort of a systems map, because I would include all of those. I'd include the academics who take funding from the alcohol industry to do health research, and I'd include the public health journals that have alcohol industry consultants as editors. But it would be quite good to map all of that and to have an explicit discussion about it, because I think by default we do slip back into quite narrow definitions. I think that's a great question to ask and to take forward and have some discussions about what the boundaries are.
Florence and then Daniel.
I will respond on the retailer's question by saying that every stakeholder should be considered in terms of what they can contribute negatively or positively to the campaign that you're working on or to the objective that you want to obtain. In the case of alcohol labeling, let's say, retailers may not be against you, although the alcohol industry probably would have convinced them that they would be. But I would equally say that the tobacco industry, the food industry, should be considered like the alcohol industry. But if you try, it depends on what you're trying to achieve, because the way the health farming industry think is in terms of what is it that we absolutely want to make sure that it doesn't happen. And so I think we should start thinking in the same frame and say, well, what are opponents, regardless of who they are, and who are our friends, and make alliances with our friends. That's how we'd frame it. And to respond to Catherine in terms of the political champions, absolutely, I believe that if you follow the kingdom model with how you frame your issues, if you follow the policy process, and if you follow the stream of politics, then you need champions, not only one. And at some point they will come. But what the kingdom theory absolutely say, and every single success that we've had, not only in public health, but also for the women's movement. Look at the suffragettes. They had to absolutely convince the men to make sure that they could vote at the next time. And only then they won. And there were centuries of people in the street. So you need to frame the issue. You need to understand the politics. You need to understand how policies are made. And that's when I think doctors can't do that. They're busy with their patients. But then you need to bring the doctors with the policymakers. And to go to your point, in the parliament right now, our most strong friends are actually doctors in all political parties, in all countries, because they understand some of the issues. So sometimes public professionals can be the champion. And it's not an individual thing. We need champions, but not only. Because if you don't have the advocates, or if you don't have the science, then you don't get anywhere. The kingdom model says that the change will happen, you will win when the three streams come together. And I do believe that sometime in public health, we concentrate only on the first, which is the evidence and the facts. We don't even know how to frame that when we go to see the policymakers, and we don't have enough professionals who follow the policy process, can go one step, one mandate, or sometimes two mandates, sometimes three mandates. To follow that, and then the politics will change, the champion will change. And it's only when the three get together that you get the change that you wanted. And unless you remember that very carefully, then you don't get the success. So we need to train the next generation, all three, not on one, not on the second, on the third, but on the three policy stream.
So thank you for this kingdom explanation, which is very useful. Maybe one point on the momentum on different cases we observed, and not mainly for alcohol. What we did observe is that the role of non-state actors is key to maintain, apart from the weapon flow and the come and go of the politics. Itself, when you have strong players apart from the state, this was the case for obesity for this group of physicians. I have in mind another example that we study on dying, for instance. This is an issue which is now debated in France, but which was formulated more or less in the 80s, and for long it was endorsed by non-state players. And as such, there is this long-run process of maintaining, and at the same moment coming in the room saying, yes, we have the agenda, we have previous experiences, and it's already available. If you are the champion, if you are the politician, we have the kit. And so you can be the champion. Okay, it's my benefit, and it's okay. So first point, non-state players in this way of maintaining the momentum can be key. And about who is the industry, what kind of perimeter is to be considered. Of course, very wide as such, but not all of those always. Sometimes they do restrict their intervention because they are economic players and they consider their cost and their benefit, and not any issue, not any cause is on their own benefit. And so there is an opportunity at certain moment to divide the front and to consider. This was the case for the second case we mentioned, but if you compared it, we had this discussion previously about the labeling for food, the famous Nutri-Score, as it was debated in France. It worked in France because the industry was divided between global players and national players, domestic players. And from that moment, the representative, which was organized to represent the whole sector, were mute because they didn't know what was their agenda. They were divided. And so what I mean is that don't forget that their strength, but also their weakness, is that they are economic players. They are calculating in terms of cost and benefits, and this can be sometimes a weakness to be considered. And just to add one thing about that, one reason why we did not use we didn't use so much the wording of lobby is that we consider that lobby is clearly on the side of market players, because they work according, and they are active according to their cost-benefit calculus and their cost-benefit perspective. While other players, even on the public health, promoting public health, they do not have. They do not are lobbies as such, because more or less what you have in mind is a cause, is a common good. It's not, maybe it is also sometimes the budget of your organization and the way of finding funds or whatsoever, but you do not systematically reason as an economic player with what is my cost, what is my benefit, what is and just to finish with that, to respond also to the importance of small size countries versus wider size countries. It's also an economic aspect. It's the size of the market, basically. It's the level of employment. Is the kind of arguments which are so strong when they are debated with top politicians. How is the weight of your sector? And it is related to the size of the country very often.
Thanks a lot, Daniel, for mentioning that, because indeed, as I said before, at the EU level, we are facing a more business-friendly, industry-friendly environment. Competitiveness is the buzzword. The economy of the EU needs to grow. So the measures that you are just mentioning, I think we need to see whether we can make that narrative stronger from public health side. So what are the impacts on the economy if we actually reduce harm from alcohol consumption? We may need to make more cost-effective arguments to fit that. I don't know how you look at that, and whether you feel that indeed, if we look ahead, that we are going to face tougher times, because you are also relying a lot on the support of NGOs, non-state actors, but our space will be diminished. I recently heard that for the environmental sector, that the Commission was saying, well, we can fund you, but not for your lobby activities. You see, so we are facing a more difficult time in that aspect. And also thinking of the European Beating Cancer Plan, the delays that we have seen. And maybe, Florence, I was thinking you may want to say something about the exhibition in the Parliament that we will be having on that particular element of the Beating Cancer Plan. But I wanted to get your response a bit on the future and with this strong economic narrative, and whether we need to strategize a bit and see whether we need to change our arguments a bit more in line, or actually what you have been saying, Danielle.
I will try, and the way I will try is by linking your question to your previous comments about the difference between advocacy and lobbying. I think there is a distinction. I'm a lobbyist. I'm a lobbyist defending the interest of public health, but I'm paid. An advocate doesn't need to be paid, and I take my job very, very seriously. That takes, and I do believe that there is a difference between advocacy and lobbying, because lobbying is a job where you really need to follow and understand the policy process. You need to have it in your heart, but that's not enough. You also need to be professional and to be able to really, really do lobbying, which is convincing policymakers that the the policies that you defend are to their interest. Now, that links me to your question about how do we manage that in an environment which is so business friendly. But the way I try to transform it in my head is to say, how do we make our case in an environment which is so concerned with the economy and how much things cost? And again, I think it has been said, but I will say it again, health is an investment, it's not a cost. And we need to start speaking like investors, and we need to frame everything we say in terms of an investment because of the cost to the economy of not doing anything. And so how do we transform that is by equipping ourselves as much as possible with economic arguments that are in favor of what we want to do. And that links me to my last point, which is we are organizing a big exhibition in the Parliament. And the point of the exhibition is to actually are calling on the EU, well, on the Parliament, to hold the commissions into account and to introduce alcohol labeling. Alcohol labeling costs nothing. It's cheap. It costs nothing. All the industries everywhere in the European Union have done it. Every single industry has done it. So why is the alcohol industry saying that they can't afford it? Surely that is not an argument. It doesn't cost anything to governments to do. It's a cheap measure, and it's a citizen's rights to know. So we've got this very big exhibition in partnership with EuroHealthNet, IOGT-NTO, the WHO, who's been amazing and supporting us with really, really amazing information. And you know what? Everyone is talking about it in the Parliament. What they are talking about is this exhibition. It's alcohol labeling because we are in the center. We've got, and we start there, we establish relationship. And I believe that we will win, actually. We will win this case. There's no reason why we shouldn't.
Great. Thank you, Florence. I suggest we finish.
Just a quick point. I mean, I'm sure everybody in the room is aware of this, but I'll just make it anyways. I mean, the OECD have done excellent work in relation to the economic argument and the return of investment in relation to prevention and everything else. So, I mean, there's plenty of really, really excellent work available for any country who wants to have that argument around economics.
Yes, indeed. So now we are arriving at the end of this day, so this session. So thank you very much to our speakers. And so please go to the European Parliament to see this exhibition. It's quite impressive. And it also gives us a note of hope that some evolution and change is possible even at the EU level. So thank you very much.